for you. The good news is we're going to look at the Bible together. The bad news is we're looking at Genesis chapter 10 in the Table of Nations. And that's bad news because that means I have to pronounce a whole lot of names tonight. And it's not the easy ones, right? It's not the Davids, right? It's not those. It's the crazy ones. And so we're going to work through this tonight. What I want you to do is to approach this. This is going to be very different than the way that we've handled even the genealogy earlier in Genesis. Because tonight, what we're looking at is we're looking at literally, it's been called the Table of Nations. How do we, after a global flood that wipes out everything, how do we get back to a place where we have all of these nations and people groups and cultures and languages? How do we get back there to that place, right? And so tonight I'm gonna be giving you a lot of information, right? So it's not going to be preaching like normal. It's just going to be information so that by the time we get out of Genesis chapter 10, what you're going to understand is, okay, now I know where this group went and who they come from, because that's going to become really important moving forward when it comes to the establishment of the nation of Israel and enemies and conflicts and all those things. So Genesis chapter 10 is like, it's literally like the first ever phone book, all right? It's not a genealogy, it's a phone book where we get to find out, where does everybody go, right? After you have Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and they end up, by the way, having a whole lot of kids who have a whole lot of kids, all right? And so where do they go, all right? Now, for a lot of people, this is like the beginning of Exodus, right? When you get there and it's like this tribe had 60,000 and you're like, okay, skip down to the end because I don't really care how many were in each tribe, right? That's what Genesis chapter 10 becomes, even different than a genealogy because, well, this Table of Nations, the names are even a little bit harder to pronounce than most of the genealogies in Scripture. So we look at it, and for a lot of people, we're like, well, why does it really matter, right? Why does it really matter where Japheth's children went? Why does it matter where Ham's children went? And what we have in Genesis chapter 10 is 70 nations that we're going to talk about tonight. 70 nations. Now, the number 70 in Scripture is symbolic of completeness. All right? And so what we have here is not a section on ancestry. What we really have in Genesis chapter 10 is how God takes one family and then geography, history, politics, and theology all go out from that one family and become very different. All right? And I mean very different. Because remember, everyone's been wiped away, and somehow from Noah, we get worshipers of Baal and Moloch and all these other people, and it's like, how do we get there? Well, that's what Genesis chapter 10 tells us. And so what we have here is we do have a structure to it, all right? And what we have right at the beginning is about a toledot, which the generations, right, that we've talked about before here. These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood. So that word toledot in Genesis tells us there's a new section coming, right? There's something new, and it's a transition. And what is the transition? Into this Table of Nations, you have in the first verse 2 through verse 5, you have the sons of Japheth, all right? Most of those people are going to go north and west, and we're going to talk specifically about places that we know of. And then you have the sons of Ham in verses 6 through 20. And most of the descendants of Ham either go to Africa, Egypt, some of them settle in the land of Canaan, and some of them travel to Mesopotamia. So that's kind of, Ham is a little bit spread out across the nations, and we're going to get into that a little bit more in just a little bit. But then you have the Shem and the sons of Shem. That's verse 21 to 31. And most of Shem's ancestors kind of go east, and Shem will be the ones who lead to Abraham. So that's the lineage by which Abraham is going to come to us. And so every one of these sections, Remember I told you we look for repetition because repetition tells us what, something that's important. Every one of these are going to have this expression in some way by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations, talking about the different sons. So it's not family, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about culture. We're talking about territory. We're talking about political life. And so God is literally populating the world with nations. And He's showing us, again, how we do that. And so tonight, we are unrolling really an ancient map to see where all these people groups go. And again, I hope it's not boring to you, but yes. It would be from Mount Ararat. So they come off the boat, they're settling in that area, and we know where it is, right? We know where Mount Ararat is today, and so it's from that area of Mount Ararat, which is Turkey. Turkey, kind of the border, somewhere around Turkey, Armenia, some place like that. So, so that's where they're coming out from. So from the ark, spreading out. And so we are getting into the weeds of details tonight. So I in advance, don't get lost because there's no reason to get lost. We're going to work through this together. So let's start with the sons of Japheth. All right, Genesis 10, 2 through 5 says this. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, Tyrus. The sons of, actually, let me stop there and we'll just talk about them and then we'll talk about the sons of Gomer. They're all the sons of Japheth. But Japheth's sons, they go out and they move toward the coast and toward the islands. The majority of Japheth's sons become Greeks, Medes. They go into Asia Minor, which is, if you go out from the Middle East, you get into not just Asia, but all those countries over on that side of the Middle East. So that's really where his descendants are going. And verse 5 tells us that they're coastland peoples, right? So that's kind of how they spread out. They go toward and navigate toward the coastlines within Greece, as we understand it, and Asia Minor. And so you have his sons listed here, Gomer and Magog, both appear in different places. Madai is going to be in northwest Iran, that area. Gomer is really near the Black Sea. Somewhere near the Black Sea is kind of where they end up. And then Javan is a Hebrew name for Greeks. So somewhere on the coast, likely, as they settle in that area. And then Tubal and Meshech are Anatolian groups. So somewhere, and we see that, and you can write these scripture references down. Ezekiel 27, Ezekiel 32, and Ezekiel 38. We get mention of these sort of descendants of Tubal and Meshech. And then Tyrus is a group that comes, and we don't really know we know a few specifics, but not a lot. So we'll get there. So let's go first to Gomer. All right, the sons of Gomer. Here we go. Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. I'll get it right in a minute. All right, so the first group here, Ashkenaz, they go north from Ararat and settle in that area. And then the others, we don't really know exactly where they go, other than they go out north. And it could be that Riphath is, in 1 Chronicles 1:6, settling in an area that becomes known as Diphath. All right? You can kind of see how that could be together. So it's likely that they settle in that area, which we don't really know ancient where that was. All right? We just know that it was somewhere in the general area of what we're talking about, Mount Ararat going out to the north. And then you have, this is the one that gets me every time, Togarmah. This family is listed in Ezekiel 27 and Ezekiel 38, and they are in the area. They're trade people, right? There's some war stories that are told about this family, and they are linked most often to Armenia. So the area, when you look at a map, you see Armenia there. That's the area they end up. And so that's Gomer's descendants. The sons of Javan, Elishah, Tarshish, Kittim, and then Dodanim. All right? And so, who are these people? These people go out into like the Cyprus area, especially Elisha. It depends on how you want to say it. Elisha could be it too. They kind of go to the Aegean Sea, that sort of area, Cyprus, places like that. Now, what about Tarshish? This is not what we think of when we think of Saul. This is out toward somewhere in the region of Spain, somewhere in that area. So they go as far out that way. All right? That's 1 Kings 10 and Jonah chapter 1. It talks about this as well. And then Kittim is again goes to Cyprus, that area. Some of the western islands that are near Cyprus, they go there. And then Didyum is the Rhodeans in 1 Chronicles chapter 1, and they also go to the Aegean Sea area, somewhere in that area as well. And so really Javan's family becomes the sort of real maritime family living on the coast, filling the coastlands, kind of what we read from verse 5. And so God is scattering people out all the way from Spain to Asia Minor. We already see that kind of happening, these sort of formations of different cultures from coastal cities to some of the other inland cities, from a city that's on the ocean to cities that are on lakes and rivers. Those are different types of culture, right? They may share some ideas about fishing and industry, but they are distinguishing about cultures and ideas and even at this point languages, whatever that looks like. We know that Babel is coming in chapter 11, but even before that, God already tells us that there is some difference in the language that's happening. What is that? I don't know. He just says it here. I don't know he doesn't tell me what it is, all right? So we kind of have to work that out. And so I hope that what we see as we move through this and we kind of spread out even further is that what we have already is God laying out the table of nations, but the gospel is not about, it's never about a particular place, right? It's always from the beginning about God's glory spreading out, right? It's going to the nations. So he gives us the remedy for that in Acts, right? We start in Jerusalem, we go out to Judea, Samaria, and then to the ends of the earth, right? That's kind of what he's doing here in the table of nations, is starting from kind of the ones that are closest, and we're going to be moving out and then moving all around. All right, so let's go to Ham. Now, Ham is the longest section, and so we're going to go through these one at a time. We're going to go through each family dynamic one at a time. But Ham, if you remember, is the son that saw Noah naked and then shamed him, and through Noah, he's cursed, right? And so Ham's descendants, some of the names some of the name and people groups you're gonna recognize, because Ham's lineage becomes the lineage by which Israel finds the most opposition in the world. So Genesis chapter 10 in verse 6, we'll start there. The sons of Ham are Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan, right? So Ham's lineage goes south and southeast from the nation of Israel, right? You can't really go, if you go south from Arad, you go into the ocean. So we're going land-wise, we're going around to, yes, there are some that are settling in the nation of Israel, right, in the land of Canaan, milk and honey, all that. And then they're going also down. So you have Cush, and Cush's descendants are the ones that settle in the upper Nile area, Sudan, Ethiopia, those type of places. So not far from the nation of Israel, right? I mean, in that time, yeah, it was more than a day's walk, right? More than a plane ride. It was a long walk, but they're the closest. And then Egypt goes to Egypt, right? It's just they kind of settle the upper northern part and down to the south of what we understand Egypt to be. And then Put is the North African groups. Jeremiah 46, Nahum 3:9, Ezekiel 27. They become Ethiopia, the northern Africa countries, kind of start there and then it spreads down. And then, of course, Canaan is the one everybody knows. They're the big boys. They're the heavy hitters, right? They settle in the land, right, where the spies go into. And when I say big boys, literally, they say they're giants. So whatever that means, whether it's offspring or whether they're Nephilim or whatever, they become a foe to Israel in the grand scheme of things. And really, right here off the bat, with just these names, we already have the future neighbors of the nation of Israel and the rivals of the nation of Israel. There's a lot of tension between all of these sons of Ham and the nation of Israel when the nation of Israel comes around. So the sons of Cush then, Seba, Havilah, Sabata, Ramah, and Sabteka. And then the sons of Ramah are Sheba and Dedan. So most of these are settling in either the Nile or East and South Africa. All right, or excuse me, South Arabia and East Africa. So again, coming down again, I know this is just heavy hitting stuff, but it is what it is. We got to work through it. And then we get to the break in this. So just like when we got to Enoch and the genealogy, we get to this break. And this becomes important to us because it tells us, okay, now we have some African nations, the Arabian nations, Sudan, Ethiopia, all those places. And now it breaks to tell us that Cush fathered Nimrod. Now, Nimrod for us has become a derogatory term where we call someone a Nimrod. It's not a nice thing. Well, it just so happens that the Nimrod in the Bible warrants the name that we use for when we call people Nimrods. He was the first on earth to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, it says. Now, Nimrod is a mighty man, which should bring us back to Genesis chapter 6:4, right? And there was a problem with the mighty men. They were growing in sort of the popularity and prominence, and they got too big for their own britches, all right? That's what my relatives used to say. You got too big for your own britches, right? Nimrod is following in the footsteps of those who were wiped out by the flood, and Nimrod becomes a man who gets too big for his own britches, all right? He is the first one that is singled out in this lineage as a kingdom builder, right? He's the first one where it shifts from these lists of families that are spreading out to established nations to where we get to someone who is actually mentioned of having this sort of incredible political power. Now, it says he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. What does that mean, hunter? First, it has the idea of not just subduing animals here. It can mean that. But it also can mean people and nations. So Nimrod really is the first one that goes out and becomes a conqueror, becomes an empire, really not just a nation builder, but an empire builder. All right? And he does it before the Lord, which, generally speaking, that could be a good thing or a bad thing, right? Because you could worship before the Lord and that be good. But it's not always good. Sometimes that phrase is used to talk about defying the Lord. And so here, what God is doing is showing us that Nimrod's got a problem. And Nimrod doesn't just have a problem with other nations, with his brothers and sisters in the world, but he has a problem with the Lord, and he's going out and he becomes a conqueror. He becomes the epitome of what happens when human ambition goes unchecked, because Nimrod will be the one under whose leadership the Tower of Babel is built. All right? So we're going to build a tower to God. That's your boy Nimrod. All right? So don't be a Nimrod. That's the thing for tonight. All right? So the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. And Shinar is southern Mesopotamia, right? Becomes Babylon, Babylonia. So Iraq, that sort of area. is where he kind of jumps off. And then, of course, Babylon, and then these other nations they get different names, but similar to what you have there. So really, this is the establishment for the first time that we see after the flood of places that become urban centers, because Babylon becomes a really prominent urban community in the ancient Near East. All right? And from that land, he went into Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth Ir, Calah, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah. That is the great city. And so this is all about Nimrod, right? So he's going out, and now not only does he have Babylon, but now Babel, it will become Babylon. Babel, and now Assyria. He builds Nineveh, which becomes the capital, right? We know that. We know that from Jonah even, that's where Jonah's called. And yeah, there's a lot of debauchery in Nineveh. That's why Jonah doesn't want to go there, because he says, if I go there, Lord, they're going to repent and you're going to forgive them. And that's why Jonah runs, because he's a Nimrod in that situation. So we read from that he went, but really it could read it went, because what it's talking about is the empire, right? It's talking about this empire that Nimrod is building. It's expanding out, right? And so now it's not just Babylon and the Babylonian understanding, but now we've got Assyria that's a part of it. And of course, Nineveh becomes the capital city of Assyria. And then you have Rehoboth Ir, it literally means broad places of the city. So again, it becomes an urban center, probably like Nineveh, pretty filled with a lot of really terrible things and debauchery. And then you have Calah. It's another Assyrian city, which the nation of Israel has a lot of problems with Assyria. They get taken into captivity, in fact, one time by them. And then you have Rezin, and Rezin is the place where we don't know where it is. It's the one that we just don't know where it's talking about. But then he says here in the text that this is the great city. And so what he's talking about is he's talking about all these big cities within the Assyrian, Babylonian understanding. And they become sort of this metropolitan complex where that's where you go. That's where things are happening, right? It's the city center, right? That's where you want to be if you're into the crazy stuff that's happening in the ancient Near East. And so then we go on from there to Egypt. Egypt fathered Ludum, Anamim, Lahabim, man. And then all the other ones, all right? Right? I want to try to pronounce them, but every time I've read it so far in my office to myself, I've messed it up. So just take your wildest imagination and see all the names we have there. And from one of them, Casluhim, thank goodness there's one easy one in there, from whom the Philistines came. So we get a little more information about these nations. And so these groups, Egypt, go out into Egyptian and Libyan territories that we understand now. And so really they're tied to that region of the area, kind of these ethno groups that come out of the nation of Egypt, as we understand, are all born out of Egypt's lineage, which of course makes a lot of sense. And then we have the little kind of like editor's note telling us that where the Philistines come from, because we know that they play an important part in the history of the nation of Israel, right? Goliath, all that stuff, the war with Philistines and all that. So we get that little note. Again, something we're given that's different that we need to look at and understand why it's there. These are the enemies, will be the enemies of the nation of Israel. And then Canaan fathered Sidon, the firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, the Hivites, the Arkites, the Sinanites, the Arvadites, the Zamorites, and the Hamathites. Afterward, the clans of Canaan dispersed. So most of these you can find in the as you move forward in the Old Testament, you can find mention of these people groups in different places. The Hittites in Genesis 23, and then the Jebusites in Joshua 15 and 2 Samuel 5. The Amorites, they're a highland people in the land of Canaan. The Girgashites, Deuteronomy chapter 7. We don't know a lot about them other than they're a part of the conquest of the land. The Hivites, that's Gibeon, Genesis 34 and Joshua 9. The Arkites are from Arka, which is in Lebanon. And the Sinites, we don't really know exactly, but they went to some Phoenician coastal city. We just don't know which one. And verse 17 tells us that basically the end of this for Canaan tells us that it goes out, right? His people are dispersed basically everywhere. They're pretty much all over the place, but the main ones are focused right there in the I'm going to call it the Promised Land, even though it's not the Promised Land just yet. But they're really focused in that area, and so and it says, verse 19, and the territory of the Canaanites extended from Sidon in the direction of Gerar as far as Gaza, and in the direction of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zibium, and Lasha. And these are the sons of Ham by their clans, their language, their lands, their nations. So it goes basically to all over the place, from North Phoenicia to southwest Philistia, which is Gaza, right? It goes from Negev, an ancient city, to all the way up, right, into the Holy Land even further. So it's all over the place. It goes from the Dead Sea, right? In case you don't know this, Sodom and Gomorrah, they have not found those cities technically, but they believe that they found evidence of where the land was, where sulfur and fire fell from heaven, and it's near the Dead Sea. All right, they found these huge chunks of sulfur that were buried in the ground. So, and that's near the Dead Sea. And so we have Canaan's footprint, and it's pretty incredible. It's pretty big, and Abraham will travel through a lot of Canaan's territory. The nation of Israel will at times as well. And so really, though, in Canaan's sort of, even though we have a lot of information and a lot of introductions, really the key figure is Nimrod. He's the one that we got to hold on to, because he's going to come up in Genesis chapter 11 when we get to the Tower of Babel and how all that transpires. And so Ham's map in all of this is really, Japheth is about going out, expanding out. Ham's is about where is the conflict going to come from, right? Where are the people groups that are going to cause the most problems? Not only because Ham saw his father naked and shamed him, but he has a curse put on him, and that's just the way that things work. And so it's about conflict for the nation of Israel. And then you have the line of Shem. Shem is the lineage of promise. That's where we get Abraham from. And so this is good news. To Shem also, the father of all the children of Ebner, the elder brother of Japheth, children were born. Now, who is Ebner? Ebner will be the one from whom the Hebrews come, so the nation of Israel. So Ebner is the one that we would trace the messianic lineage through. We're going back to Noah from Jesus. We're gonna land somewhere in Ebner, or with Ebner, I should say. And so the sons of Shem are Elam, Asher, Arpachshad, Lud, and Aram. Again, some of them go to what we call Persia, what becomes Persia, Assyria. Arpachshad is the key. He leads to Abraham. We'll see that later in Genesis. And then Lud is a son who is associated with with a lady named Lydia, and that's again coming from sort of not really Turkey, but more in that sort of area. And then Aram they become Syrians, so they become the northern neighbors of the nation of Israel. And the sons of Aram are Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Uz is famous from Job 1:1 in the land of Uz, right? Probably somewhere in northern Arabia. And then Hul and Gether and Mash, we don't know where they are other than they're somewhere in the north. And then Aram's line is Syria and then upper Mesopotamia. So basically Syria and kind of over into potentially northern parts of the Middle East. So, and then Arpachshad fathered Shelah. Shelah fathered Ebner. Again, this is the line that Abraham is going to come from. The genealogy of Jesus will trace back to that as well. And so Ebner was born. To Ebner was born two sons. The name of one was Peleg. For in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Now, Peleg, the reason it says the days of the earth were provided, his name literally means to divide. So it says the earth was divided. His name means to divide. Why is that? Well, because what we're gonna see very soon in Genesis chapter 11 is the greatest divide in all of human history at the Tower of Babel, where it's not just you have different languages that are going out, but what does God say there? He confuses the languages, right? Confuses the languages. So Peleg is going to be coming out of that, and all of that we're going to talk about in Genesis chapter 11, so I'll hold on to that. And then Joktan is Arabia, Saudi Arabia, some of those other places is kind of where his folks will end up in the grand scheme of things. And he fathered Almadad, Shalef, Hasmor, Avith, I have to say that real slow, and Jerah, again, populating Arabia in that area, eastern Yemen for Hazarvareth and his folks. And so you have all these other, you have Hadaram and Olza and Dikla, which are, again, different places, some of them in Yemen, Obal, Abamel, and Sheba, Arabia, again, laying out sort of the geography of who's surrounding the nation of Israel. Ophir, Havilah, Jobad, all these were the sons of Joktan. Ophir is 1 Kings 9 and 1 Kings 10. It's associated with gold, so it's one of these Arabian, sort of African Arabian countries that are really, even now, that are famous for the production of precious metal, gold, and things like that. We don't know where Jobad is from. Not my bad, but Jobad. Just kidding. I've been waiting all day to say that. No, we don't really know where that is, but again, probably somewhere in the same general area, somewhere in that Arabian Peninsula type area. The territory in which they live extended from Mesha in the direction of Sephar to the hill country to the east. Now, take that as you will. Look at an ancient map and see what you can find out, because most of those places you're not going to be able to find exactly. So it may say this is where it could be. Just know that it's spread out, but it's somewhere in the Arabian area, and it goes to the hill country. And Shem is singled out as the father of all the children of Ebner. So again, he wants us to understand that this is the lineage, right? This is the one that we need to hold on to when it comes to the promise that God has made, right? So that's who we're holding on to here. And then the summary of all of this in verse 32 is it ends with these are the clans of the sons of Noah according to their genealogies and their nations, and from these nations spread abroad on the earth after the flood. So all of humanity goes out, and it may not sound like, I know I just threw a lot of places and names and like talking about the Middle East, but the point is that not only do we have the nation of Israel that's going to be established with Abraham and Jacob and Israel and all that. But what we have is God establishing and showing us that all these different groups go out to these different places. And the interesting thing about it is the ones that are generally closest to the nation of Israel become the ones that become Israel's greatest enemies, right? You set a table for me in the presence of my enemies, right? That is the nation of Israel. that's what becomes of them. And already, even before Israel is established, we already know there's going to be tension, right? Because they're surrounded most immediately by the cursed line of Ham. And it is true that Ham's lineage is spread out, that it's not just right there surrounding Israel, but it goes down into Africa too, and South Africa and all across the continent. But it doesn't negate the fact that God is giving us very specific details that are important for us, not that necessarily that we know exactly where every place is, but to show us that the nations are going out, but He's already telling us how this is going to play out. Right? He's already telling us who the messianic lineage is going to be. Well, let's go with Abrahamic lineage for now. But he's already showing us where that's going to happen. But He's also showing us where this sort of real point of contention is going to be with Nimrod and Babylon and Assyria. So we're already getting pictures of that, and some into Persia, right? Which is going to become an issue for the nation of Israel even later. So God is showing us all this, and if we just read over it, then we may miss that reality, right? We can look and see that He talks a lot about the descendants of Ham, but if we don't know them, if we don't know where they're at, then it's just a list of stuff we don't know anything about, right? But if we know that already, then when we get to, in the future, Genesis chapter 11 and other places in Genesis, it's going to make more sense to us because we're going to have an idea about what God was already doing in Genesis chapter 10. And so Genesis chapter 10 doesn't just give us history, it gives us the foundation for missions. God creates nations. God created nations, and He scattered them, not just as a result of judgment, although that was one of the results of the judgment of Babel, is that he not only scattered them, but He also confused the language. So they're already going out in what we would say is scattered, right? If you go from Spain to South Africa, that's pretty scattered. But it goes even further because they end up all over the world, right? They end up in North America and South America, and they end up in all of these different places. And so it's kind of pointing us to what's going to happen in Genesis 11 with Babel, but also what's going to happen at Pentecost. Right? Because at Babel, God confuses the language, but at Pentecost, God gives the gift of tongues, which is not like, shall I drive my Honda and tie my bow tie and tie my tie? No, what's happening in the book of Acts is that you have people who are Greek and speak Greek, and they're preaching in Aramaic, in Hebrew, which they don't know. But they're doing that, and the people are not just, or it could be that, or they could be preaching in Greek, and somebody who doesn't speak Greek is understanding everything that they say. Right? That's what's happening. And so what God is doing is He's giving us the nations. Ask, and I'll give the nations to you. Right? He's laid it out for us. He's shown us there's conflict. Brother against brother, nation against nation. All that stuff is already there. He's showing us that judgment is coming and the confusing of the language, but we already know the end of the story, and that God is going to bring this all the way back around by the Holy Spirit. And so when we read these names, we're not looking at forgotten people. We're looking at nations that God loved, right? Nations that God gave His Son for. Because, we may not be able to go to the Jebusites today, but we have an obligation and a calling to go to that nation, whatever it's called today. We have an obligation, right, to go therefore, right, to the ends of the earth, to preach the gospel. And how do we do that? To the nations, right? That's how. And so Genesis chapter 10, God is putting the blueprint in place for everything He's going to tell us in the New Testament. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations. Imagine if we didn't have Genesis chapter 10. If we didn't have the table of nations. If we didn't have established people groups. Would we have established our own? Maybe. Maybe. But maybe not. But with God giving us this clear direction, now we know when we get to Matthew chapter 28, when God says go to the nations, we know exactly what He means. every tribe, every tongue, every nation. We go to everyone. We go to the ones closest to us who sometimes are the most difficult to deal with. That means across the hall, right? In our house. Sometimes the most difficult people to deal with. But it also means we go out as far as we can travel to proclaim the good news of the gospel to the nations. He's given us everything that we need and everything that we need to know. And the things we're not certain about, it's okay. The places we're not certain about, it's okay. Because there are unreached people groups out there, right, that we don't know anything about, know little about, in fact. They're just as worthy of this commission and this calling. And they're a part of what God has called us to do. We can't do that unless we understand that nations exist, and we understand that our obligation is to reach them. And God is establishing all this because the nation of Israel will become a light to the nations. Right? It will be the beacon to the world as they live for Yahweh, for the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Any questions tonight? I know